I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023, and boy, is it ever hot. And yesterday was really, really hot, so I think today is going to be about the same. So be safe, stay hydrated, drink water, and don't exert yourself out in the sun in the heat for too long. Just be careful, and be careful for the people that are around you, for the animals that are around you as well. Well, as always, I want to thank you for joining the show, for watching and supporting it. I invite you to support it. You can support it by going to our YouTube channel, YouTube Insight News, MN, and becoming a subscriber. Subscribe, like, and share. We've got about 500 subscribers so far, not quite, almost. Our goal is 1,000, and your decision to be a subscriber and to tell your friends to join you in subscribing moves us one click at a time closer to the goal of 1,000 subscribers. So do your part. I mentioned and I thank all of the platforms that we use. We use 2 YouTube platforms, not only YouTube Inside News, but also YouTube Black Press USA. And these shows are streamed live and archived at the website, the streaming platform for the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And we are also presenting on their platform for Facebook, Black Press USA Facebook, on Inside News' Facebook page and Al McFarlane's Facebook page. In addition, Twitter and LinkedIn. We stream live to those as well. So our goal is to connect with you wherever we can, wherever you are, and invite you to be part of what we call robust conversations. Today is going to be no exception. I'm excited to meet 2 new friends, 2 authors. Rob Eschmann is the author of a book entitled When the Hood Comes Off. And Erin Sharkey is a writer, a arts and abolition organizer based here in Minneapolis. She's editor of a Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars. It's a milkweed production. So we're going to have a good conversation about that in just a few minutes. Before I begin, I want to remind you that we're joining and invite you to join us at the Deaf Community Support Center to promoting COVID-19 awareness and prevention. So as we partner with the Minnesota Department of Health, it's important to remember that the risk of COVID-19 still exists. I ask you to join me that we should all prioritize the safety of ourselves and of our community by continuing to follow COVID-19 protocols, things such as washing our hands, staying aware, prioritizing prevention. By working together, we can create awareness, we can encourage testing, we can help people stay healthy. So listen, enjoy the program, and as you enjoy it, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. Join the cause. Together, let's create a healthier and safer community. Cool. So let me start by talking to my new friend, Rob Eschmann. He's the author of When the Hood Comes Off. Brother Rob, how you doing? Good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation.
Oh, I'm doing well, Al. Thanks so much for having me.
And so your book, When the Hood Comes Off, suggests a transformative journey. What prompted you to write this book, to explore this theme? What personal insights and experiences influence the narrative that you present in this book?
Yeah. I think that for me, the ideas or the questions that drove this book were really when I began to learn about, dominant theories of racism, and this idea that since the years of the classic civil rights movement in the post-Jim Crow U.S., the racism has become more subtle. It's become silent. It's become something that hides in most mainstream settings. And, I think that is really teaches us how racism works in a world where discrimination is illegal. But it also seemed to contradict some of my own personal experiences just on the internet, from playing video games to seeing comments under YouTube videos or news articles. It really seemed like online we see spaces where more explicit racism is allowed, and where people don't face consequences for sharing those types of views. And so, really, the book is an investigation into the ways that technology changes how we experience racism, how we understand racism, and then ultimately how we respond to racism. And I think that is that's central to what I talk about, is that this is not just a book about racism. It's a book about how people are fighting against racism. And as
Mhm.
racism becomes more visible online, folks of color are finding new and innovative ways to use digital tools to fight back.
And so, go into the metaphor of the hood. What are you talking about? The hood coming off. Where does that image come from, and where does it lead you? Where does it lead the story?
Yeah, yeah. So for me, the hood, if you look at the cover, obviously this is a KKK hood, and this is maybe the biggest symbol of racism that we have in the U.S. And so when you think about what the purpose of the hood, one of the purposes was to hide the identity of these domestic terrorists who
Mhm.
were, inflicting harm on Black communities. That the people behind those hoods were, these are teachers, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're pastors. These are
Mhm.
regular community members who are engaging in acts of violence and hatred, and who did not want their faces to be attached to those things. So the hood, in that sense, hid their identities. And when I think about racism nowadays, it hides behind a metaphorical hood of subtlety. That racism is embedded in everyday interactions without people saying, I hate Black folks. They treat Black folks a little bit differently in a way that, impacts our health and our livelihood. The hood coming off is about the way that technology can unmask racism. It can reveal the way that racism works for people who did not know that it was still as powerful as it is today. And I think for folks who are on the receiving end of racism, we know what racism looks like, even when the hood is on, even when it's hiding its identity. But for many people, it takes the sharing of that video. It takes seeing a racist comment online for them to realize, oh wow, this is still a thing. This is something that we still need to deal with. I thought that it was fixed back when Obama became elected, but it turns out we still have work to do.
And so I asked the question, to what end? The hood comes off, and the hood comes off, and so how do you respond? Where does the removal of that hiding place leave us? I mean, the question is, so what?
Yeah, yeah. So the most common way to respond to subtle forms of racism is to not respond. This is what research tells us, is that most of the time we experience these things in silence, that we don't have we don't feel we have the ability to speak out. We're worried about doing so. And I think that when the hood comes off, when racism is unmasked, we have a more clear enemy that we're fighting against. And people feel more comfortable challenging racism in online spaces than they do in person. That one of the things I show is that a lot of the barriers to responding to racism in face-to-face situations are taken away in online spaces. And what this means, this is a shift in power dynamics. So instead of Black folks and folks of color feeling like they cannot respond without losing their jobs, that they cannot challenge racism without losing a friend, in online spaces, we have a communal or community collective response to racism that really empowers folks and makes them feel like they no longer are just silent victims, and that they have more agency and ability to start conversations, to clap back at racists, to create consequences for racists when our everyday institutions or in schools are not creating consequences. That we are finding ways to really interrupt the cycle, to stop racist ideologies from reproducing without anyone pointing out that this is problematic, and it needs to change. And so where does that leave us? It leaves us in a place where the way that the nation is talking about race and racism has changed drastically over the past decade. I think that terms like, for example, I use the term microaggression. The word microaggression has increased its usage in Twitter over 8,000% over the last 10 years. The more and more people are beginning to understand the mechanisms of racism. And I think we really can see the effects of this when we look at places like Florida and other places around the country that are trying to ban the teaching of race in school. It's because they are worried about how the conversation is changing and how more people are waking up. More people are seeing what racism looks like once the hood comes off.
What's the end game for the book and the ideas you're presenting in the book? What's Rob's end game?
Yeah, man.
What's the goal here?
Yeah, so my goal is to dismantle racism. That I think that
Mhm.
all of my work, I see this as being Black freedom work. That everything I do is about highlighting the way that racism works, and the more that we understand how racism works, the better we're going to be able to strategize to get together and fix the problem. I don't think that activism stops online. I think that all the things that we're doing online and changing patterns of discourse, changing the conversation are important. But then what needs to happen next is that we use this momentum, right, that we have in online spaces to create in-person organizing strategies and go after specific policy changes. And I do think that we're seeing examples of that now.
What's your story, Rob? What's your background? Are you from here, Twin Cities, or just give us an idea of who you are?
Yeah, no, I'm from Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago. I lived in Chicago all my life until 2017 when I finished my PhD at the University of Chicago. Then I moved to Boston for 4 years. That was my first professor job, and now I'm in New York. I'm a professor at Columbia University.
Okay, okay. And your field of teaching is what?
I teach in the School of Social Work.
Social work.
Uh,
Okay. All
hmm
right. Great.
hmm
Great. And so, are you familiar with? I've been just inundated or inundated myself in the work of Karen Hunter and Professor Carr. Uh, um, I'll think of his first name in a minute, but they have produced a project called Narrative, Knarrative. It's a social media platform that is a Black sort of experiment, and I envision it as our people building the current version in the digital arena of the pyramids, building new pyramids, creating structures that will likely last and can last, that can be intended to last for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years. And I raise that up because it seems that we have technology that allows us to connect differently and to build without seeking permission from those that oppress us. In fact, to learn that if we are going to build, it must be a building that is motivated by our internal, intuitive, and historical framework that has a position against those ideas that were uh, oppressive and destructive to us in particular, but as we look at it, actually to the human race. And
Yeah.
so, where do you see us going? That's kind of the question that I want to bring or ask you to jump on. What do you see us doing? How do you see us being and becoming ourselves in a way that we deliver something different to existence itself? What do you think?
Yeah, I love that idea of creating something lasting like the pyramids. And this summer, actually, I went to Egypt and got to see them myself for the first time. Just amazing to witness that history. You know, I think that you're onto something here. Like during one of the things I talk about in my book is that during the civil rights movement, activists had to strategize ways to get the attention of the mainstream media, of traditional media sources, in order to share the images and the video and the stories of the violence that was happening as they were using nonviolent tactics to engage in activist work. And one of the things that's changed is that through social media, activists have been able to bypass the media gatekeepers. The research on, the uprisings in Ferguson showed that Black activists on the ground were bigger hubs for information sharing than
Mhm,
were the traditional news media
mhm.
journalists. And I think that's a big deal. That means that Black folks on the ground are able to get amplify their messages, amplify injustices without the permission of the people who are in charge, who may not have it in their best interest to amplify their voices. And I think that is huge for us. It has been a phenomena, but I also think that we're in a moment now where we're realizing that some of these social media giants can become the new gatekeepers. That the algorithms can be used to dampen some of the messages. Right?
And so, what do we do about that? How do we both be aware, but also continue to forge our interest and keep them front and center, at least for us? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I feel Black people have been finding ways to get the word out. For long before Elon bought Twitter, right?
Mhm.
One of the first papers I read on this subject was about bloggers in Katrina, Black bloggers in Katrina who were sharing counter narratives, and these were not blog companies that were designed for Black people to share the news, but Black people found a way to use them, and I think that we're going to continue to do that. That right now, one of the things we have to realize is that social media companies have a big economic incentive to keep Black people on the platforms. Right, the most used hashtag of all time is Black Lives Matter, and so they don't want us to leave those platforms. And I, my personal take is that I think that the capitalist interests are going to outweigh the ideology, and that they're going to they're not going to try and push Black folks out. But I do think that we're ready to move to another platform if need be. I've heard people talk about, can we create our own platform? And
Mhm.
I'm not sure where the world is going to go, but I know that, right, and that I know that I am confident in us as a people on finding the best ways to keep the momentum that we've gained. And I think the biggest thing for us to figure out is how to translate this new power that we have of getting our voices out into real world action. Building up people's capacity to be change makers. And I think that's hugely important. And the lesson from the classic civil rights movement is that it's not just about the Martin Luther Kings. It's about Ella Baker training everyday people to be a part of the movement in ways that in their everyday lives, and then getting involved in the work. It's the infrastructure that is going to allow for sustained movements, right? Sustained, organizing, as opposed to just, a hashtag that may flash out. We need to develop people to really take the helm here.
Born and raised in Chicago, right?
Hmm.
Who are your people? I raised the question to get a sense of whose shoulders you stand on. What's your lineage, and what does lineage mean to you? And
When
what
it,
does it mean as you craft or co-author a future?
yeah. Well, what do you mean? Who are my people?
Your mama, your daddy, your grandma, your grandpa, the people that brought you from eternity to now.
Okay, okay. Yeah, my mother is a social worker, and so she's someone who has been doing the work of supporting marginalized youth, working in Chicago public schools. For most of the time I've been growing up, and I see her as being central to who I am and who I am becoming. I think back, some of my strongest memories are of my mother reading books to my sister and I. And I just think that developed a lifelong love
Mhm.
of reading. And so I think about, writing a book now. I can't uh, um, see that happening without my mom being intentional about making sure that we loved reading and writing. And my sister Reese Eschmann is an author too. My father is a teacher and a coach, and he's somebody who was in the high school that he worked in, as someone who was investing in kids' lives, beyond the classroom, taking kids on camping trips that I used to go with them, and so he's someone who was a coach who had a lasting impact. And I think that he really helped me. He raised me in a way to. I really thought that I did not think it was an option to pick a profession that was just about making money and was not about building a community. And so I think that that's a value that definitely was instilled in me from my folks.
What did you learn in Egypt when you were there? What were your best experiences? What are you thinking about now as you reflect on your experience in Egypt? What was your
You
intention in
know,
going there?
yeah, yeah. I think I marveled at the human capacity to create. And it was just amazing to see, and the fact that we still can't figure out how they made that, right?
Mhm.
um, and it was amazing for me to see this idea of something, being seemingly eternal, that was made, but before we had the technologies that we rely on now. There were no smartphones, or right, there were no crane, there were no there was no none of the building machines that we would rely on now,
Mhm.
and that they made it happen. And I think that was amazing to me. And on the same trip, I also went to Rome and saw that history. And I think one thing I reflected on was how much history around the world had been destroyed through the projects of colonialism.
Mhm.
And that right now we have this history in Rome that we can see. We have a little bit in Egypt that we can see, but there's history all around the world that was intentionally destroyed to make it seem as if civilization was just in one place. And so I think that's something that I'm taking with me, is right marveling at human ingenuity, but then also being saddened by the fact that there are forces that want to erase the things that we've done, in particular the things that we've done if you got melanin in your skin.
I'm reading a book now by an author who's based here in Twin Cities. His name is Seba Ahmed Azahir, and the book is called The Three Books of Kemet. I think that's the name of it. I've got it over there. I can't reach it right now, but three books of, or the knowledge of Kemet. So it's Black knowledge. And one of the things he presents in the book is this idea that for African people everywhere, somehow to reconnect with uh, the historic, or the the uh, antiquities reality that we came to writing and language, to
Mhm.
meditate, think about what it meant for the Nile Valley, people of Nile Valley, to emerge over a long period of time and create uh, agreements that are expressed in symbols and sounds that end up being language and that end up being writing. And until we sort of begin to grasp the meaning, the process, and the object, and really that's it, to understand the creation and the act of creating as a single thing.
Mhm.
If we discover that and apply the principles associated with that knowledge, we will change the world. Does that make any
Hmm.
sense to you at all? And that's coming out of his Akephron. He calls it Akephron, way of thinking, way of knowledge. A lot of language, trying to work on the question of the name Africa or Akephron. And the Akephron concept deals with the beetle as a representation of the process of a regeneration in life that the Akephron people recognized and documented. Any of that resonate with you at all?
I'm not familiar with that book, but I would say that I am absolutely a student of history and Black history. I think it's important that we rescue the memory of our leaders and our movements, as we and use lessons from them in order to figure out strategies for moving forward. And so whether that's going back to looking at ancient days, or whether that's looking 50 years back at organizers before the classic years of the civil rights movement, or 75 years back, I think that these things are hugely important for us having hope and remembering that we do have the power to make change.
Let me pivot and thank you, brother. Hang out for me if you don't mind, because I want to bring
Of
a
course.
other author in, Erin Sharkey. And then when we do this interview, have us all sit together and just kick it up a little bit, if you're cool with that.
Of course.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much. And let me introduce and bring in Erin Sharkey. Erin, I introduce you as a writer, an arts and abolition organizer. You're based here in Minneapolis,
I
and you
am.
edit A Darker Wilderness, Black
Mhm.
Nature Writing from Soil to Stars. Tell us about that book, first of all. And even before that, welcome. So good to
Thank
meet you.
you.
Thank you for being here.
I know. I'm so excited to be brought into the conversation, because so many things from your conversation with Rob were stimulating for me. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well,
Um,
talk about your book, first of all,
mhm.
and explain and invite people to get the book and to know it. But also, please react to everything that Rob and I talked about. Just build that into the conversation, because
Sure.
at the end, we're going to have all of us together talking, okay? But
Okay,
go ahead.
sounds great. Yeah,
Yeah.
so A Darker Wilderness is a collection of Black nature writing, filled with new and original essays from Black writers about their relationship with nature. It was really born in two different places. I was able to have a residency at the Anderson Library at the University of Minnesota. So I spent some time with the Givens Collection of African American History and Memory. And so I'm fascinated by the archive and thinking about the evidence of things in the archive. And then the other place that it was born was in a prison writing class. And I teach with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. And I was asked to teach a new class. And so I offered to teach a nature writing class at Faribault Correctional, which is the biggest institution in the state. And I was just fascinated and really inspired by the ways the men in that class were able to find nature and define its power in a place where nature isn't the main feature, or that they didn't have really access to the sort of liberative qualities of nature, the ways in which nature teaches us about possibility. And so, yeah, I was inspired to bring this collection together, and was really honored to work alongside the writers who approached the topics with just really thoughtfulness and beauty. And I'm really proud of the collection. It's for sale, but where books are sold, you can get it at local bookstores in the Twin Cities. I encourage you to buy one at your local. Sure.
All right. Well, listen, questions I have for you. And for example, I want to know what you mean by saying you're an abolition organizer. What does that mean?
Sure.
And my notes say that you incorporate storytelling and cultural work to promote social justice. And so talk about how you believe art and creative expression are and ought to be used as tools to address systemic issues and to advocate meaningful change. Talk about that for a minute.
Sure. Well, I think the experiment with prisons and policing should be over. It's really bore out that it's not a system that works for our benefit. It doesn't equal less crime. It doesn't equal safer communities. So in my heart, I believe that prisons are a bankrupt solution. I was involved in a restorative justice experience when I lived in New York, and was part of a youth organization. We had experienced an arson fire and really had to think about what we meant by what would it mean to feel healed? What would it mean to feel justice? And it was really clear that sending a teenager away for a very long time was not a solution that served us or served our community at all. And so we advocated with the district attorney to sentence in community. And so we spent years together with someone who had hurt us a great deal, but we came out of it with deep relationships, with better understandings of ourselves, more skills to deal with conflict together, and a person in our community who is a union plumber and a father and a homeowner. And that, I feel like, gave me a real clear example of the ways in which we can think about things differently. And I think the biggest challenge when it comes to abolition is that we have a lack of imagination about what could be in its place. And I don't want to stop by feeling like I can't imagine, or I don't like to stop at the boundaries of my imagination. I like to really push on them and to think about, because I think it's essential for us to consider how we could operate differently in order for us to get somewhere different than where we are. And I think that imagination and creativity are the most important tools in figuring out the ways in which we can not outsource our conflict between us to somebody else who does not have our interest in mind, and a system that harms everybody, I think. And so that's what my organizing has been, is around creating art with folks, having conversations with people about what our responsibility is to each other. How can we create solutions, especially when it comes to reentry? That's really an important aspect of my life right now, is really working alongside folks who've navigated the challenges of coming home from incarceration, and really call the other members of my community together to talk about how we can welcome folks home, and we can provide them with opportunities that lead to a stronger community, a stronger network of people. And so for me, it sounds like a big deal, but really it's like, I think figuring out how to know my neighbors better and thinking
Mm.
about how we can address conflicts between us without calling in outsiders who don't know us and don't care about us in the ways that we care about each other or can care about each other.
Have you witnessed conflict resolutions in communities other than where you are now in Minneapolis or around the country that serve as models? Have you seen any, for example, in Europe or Africa or Latin America and other cultures that you think we
Yeah.
ought to be learning about?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen better prisons, or prisons that are maybe friendlier, systems that aren't as forever or aren't as racist, but in countries that don't have as many challenges as we have in terms of the complexity of our diversity in this country, and I think that, yeah, I'm excited to learn more. I'd love if someone wants to send me. I've never been to the continent before. I'd love to visit. I'm sure there's many, many things to learn on lots of fronts there. But yeah, I think I have lots of examples that I've heard or I know about across the country of communities that really did hard things together to address real significant harms and harms that had consequences. I don't think that it's some people say it's a fantasy. Like, how can you really think that we can address it? And I do think that there's a different way for us to respond to harms in our communities.
I raised the question because I'll tell you my story. I visited Ghana. My first trip to Ghana was, I think, in maybe 1984, 94. I can't remember. It might have been 94. And while I was there with a kind of a study group from Minneapolis that was taking adults like me and young people, it was a male group and then a women's group. The idea was to create a bonding experience, a mentoring experience between elders and young people. And in Accra, we went to visit a traditional court for half a day. And it was like you see on TV, but these were Black men sitting on the bench, and that were the barristers, the lawyers, and they were wearing these flax wigs. And there was something funny about that. Kind of didn't make sense. It was interesting that they were sitting in the black robes and had these white wigs on. I said, well, okay, all right, it's theater, and you all are doing what you do, playing the roles. And then the next day or so, we went to Kumasi, to the seat of the Ashanti people, the Asantehene, and they have there something they call, I think I'm saying this right, the Apatakesi, which meant like the great sitting. And it's a regular weekly event where all of the clan chiefs or chiefs of different families gather in this huge basketball court type arena with no walls around it, but a covering. And each of the families sits in their assigned role in the formation of the community, meaning the royals, the Asantehene, was called the set in the rear. They were at a place where everything sort of flowed to and from them. And opposite was called the center, which was occupied by the group that were the warriors, war leaders, right? And on both sides, left flank and right flank, every clan had their function. Well, we were there at a time when they were having a dispute resolution between a family, two families, or two people. One accused the other of some kind of, a misappropriation of resources or title. And what I discovered is that in this process, both the accuser and the accused neither stood alone in this argument or conflict. Both families were required to come and stand, the family of the accuser and the family of the accused. And they all had to have their leadership, the family. And then everybody heard, a discussion of the problem. All the people around talked about it. At the end of it, the tribe, the leaders made a judgment, and somebody was either absolved or found guilty and punished. But that was a system that I thought was interesting, and it was traditional, and it kept. And the punishment then was banishment, not imprisonment. And so that's why I raised the question: are there models, other ways we can look at being with each other, acknowledging our hurt, our pain when we feel we've been wronged, and resolve that in a way that is different from the system here in the West, which really doesn't have a way out for us outside of us being apprehended and and imprisoned. And
Yep.
and here it's like that process ends up being a business for them. The
Mhm.
imprisonment of Black bodies
Yep.
uh, is a growth industry and
Yes.
has been. It's a big
Yep.
business, right?
Big business. That's true.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
I think that there's a value. I think what's at the heart of those sort of community processes is that it does not reduce the offender to a single moment, to their
mhm,
worst moment,
mhm,
and invites us to the complexity of our experiences.
mhm.
Um, and I think that that's, I think that's part of why I teach writing, is because I believe in the power of story. I believe, that a well-crafted tale can connect with almost anybody, um, and we are more than our worst day.
So,
Yeah.
a darker wilderness, Black nature writing from
Mhm.
soil to stars. Explain that.
Yes.
Sit with that for a minute and tell
Sure.
me, yeah, I mean, what is darker wilderness? What's that mean, first of all? And
Yeah.
I haven't heard the term Black nature writing. I should have, but I haven't. So I'm
Mhm.
glad to learn about it today. And
Yeah.
what did you mean? What do you mean when you say from soil to stars? So break it all down for me.
I will. I love writing, but I'm not a great title maker. I feel like I snapped on this one. I feel happy with the title eventually, but it was hard to come to. But I think I was inspired by Penumbra Theater and the Umbra, like thinking about what is darkness, and is enlightenment, or the power to bring light to something, does that make it better? And I think that there is a deepening, a richness in the dark parts of a wilderness that I think sort of mirror the ways in which Black folks, our relationship with nature, the ways in which we've been stewarding nature since our arrival on this continent. Um, is powerful, and it requires that we unearth it because it has been forgotten from the record often. The archive is reflects the archivists, right? So big institutions with power to collect pick what they think is valuable and important in our history, and the objects that they collect reflect that. And so that's part of why we don't have a complete record of Black folks over time. So looking at the history of nature writing as a concept, it's really tied with the colonial project. It's really about um, Western expansion and industrialization, and it's really was the project of mostly cis white men who were, if you imagine nature writing, it's really, I imagine myself thinking about someone climbing to a top peak that no one's ever gotten to before, and planting their flag there and claiming it, maybe naming it for themselves. Think about the history of natural history museums that had bodies of people that looked like you and I in their collections until maybe still, or until very recently. And so I think it's important to reclaim that sort of area, to think about the ways that Black folks have been in relationship with nature, and then oftentimes it's steward for many, many years, and many years on land that was not under our control or under our ownership. Um, and so each of the essays in the collection are anchored by a archival object. So they're all in conversation with an archival object. And some of those objects are of personal significance, like from a family collection or from
Mhm.
their parents' photo albums. And
Give me an example. Talk about one of them.
Sure. Michael Kleber Diggs, who's a local poet. I'm partial to poets who write long form. So there's several poets who write really beautifully and lyrically in this collection. And he wrote about the year of his childhood when he lived with his grandparents after his father was killed as a young person. I think he was 8 or 9 years old, with his twin brother, and talked about the domestic life at their house and the ways that they kept a garden, the ways that they interacted with food, particularly learning how to fish with his grandfather. And so he was able to convince a family member to find his grandfather's tackle box in somebody's garage somewhere, I think in the Dallas area. And we were able to actually digitize it for the first time. So it exists in this collection in the same way that a lot of materials of Black memory exist in family collections. But there's that sort of range that was put into the digital archive in 2020. But on the other end of the spectrum, I wrote an essay for the collection inspired by Benjamin Banneker and his almanacs that he wrote in the late 1790s. Fascinated by his genius as a scientist, the ways that he contributed to city planning across the Northeast, and the way he made clocks and thought about 17-year cicadas. And so I took the best days form from the Farmer's Almanac, which is like astrology for farmers. It's a thing that tells you the best day to shear your sheep, or to repay a debt, or to plant crops that will bear fruit. And I used that structure, and I created a best days calendar for an urban farm that I lived and worked at in Buffalo, New York, and thought about the ways in which an urban place also has a pattern. It also has a natural rhythm. And the hood is a natural place because we are nature and we're there, and nature persists everywhere. It's not just a destination that you go to look at something pretty. It's also can be in our daily, in our daily lives and in our yards. And so there's some other essays in the collection that sort of reflect that experience. One of the essays in the collection was written by Ronald Greer, who's currently incarcerated. He's a writer with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, and he reflected on his grandfather's garden in Detroit, in the neighborhood that he grew up in, and the ways that his imagination grew in that garden in the midst of a neighborhood that was really plagued by drug addiction and poverty.
Talk about Free Black Dirt. That's another one of your projects, and also mention your film projects. I see two listed here. One is Sweetness of Wild, and the other is Small Business Revolution. Take a minute on each of those topics, because then I want to ask you about your personal story and then bring Brother Rob back in.
Sure. So Free Black Dirt is a project that I started with my best friend, Janata Petrus, who's a very talented writer and theater maker and filmmaker, and a really great friend. We started it over 10 years ago. And it was a project to mount our first play production. And so she's wrote a play. I'm pretty good at organizing things. So it's my first, it was my first project as a producer, and I've been able to use those skills in other projects. So just here in the Twin Cities, the 6th season of the Small Business Revolution was filmed in the wake of the uprising and in the midst of the COVID pandemic, really focusing on the challenges and opportunities for Black business owners in the Twin Cities. And it was a really amazing project. I got to connect with lots of business owners, including Spokesman Recorder, I'm sure is part of the news network that you are part of too. So I've been honored to produce other things too. And it's one of my favorite sort of side projects.
Great. Well, let's bring Brother your story. So where were you born? You born here in Twin Cities? Or what's your personal story?
I was born just south of Milwaukee, but we only were Wisconsin residents for about a year. And I grew up here in the Twin Cities in the sort of Mac Groveland area in St. Paul, and in South Minneapolis in the Powderhorn neighborhood. I did move for 10 years out to Buffalo, New York, and I lived and worked on a farm there. I also split my time between Minneapolis, I live northeast, and Root Springs, which is a retreat and respite space in Annandale, Minnesota. I'm one of the 4 caretakers of that space. And and I feel honored to be part of both those communities and to provide a space where folks can do very valuable and important rest and respite. I think it's an essential component to the movement, and I think we've got to create more spaces where people can be in nature, can be with themselves, to heal, to plan, to grieve.
So who's your family? Whose shoulders are you standing on? And do you take a sense of is there a sense of lineage in your daily life? Are you conscious, aware of generations and generations, or how do you assemble the world every day?
Yeah, so I am. I had really amazing parents. My mom was a special ed teacher and teacher my whole childhood. Important person in our church community. My stepdad was a mediator with the Attorney General's office here in Minnesota, and so I have a a mediator's communication skills. My dad, I was estranged from him as a child, but reconnected with my father as an adult, and was really honored to spend and learn from him. His people are from Mississippi by way of Milwaukee. And yeah, I'm one of 7 kids, and I got a whole gaggle of aunties and uncles, and I love visiting both places and getting to learn about that community of people. I also am part of a Black feminist lesbian community, my chosen family, who I really feel honored to be in relationship and understand the legacy that they have really laid for me too.
We bring Rob back in, and I'm curious as to what questions you had or thoughts you had when he was sharing his work, and he may have questions or thoughts or comments on the interview that you and I just had. But when you and I started, Erin, you said, "Oh, this was really cool because of the territory we were exploring." What did you have in mind? What was capturing your interest at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, so many things, but I was excited about thinking about the ways that Black folks create our own spaces and our own ways of sharing information and communicating. And I think that's true when it comes to historical record as well. And I think that the role of imagination in our understanding of history is a little highlighted feature. I think it's important, especially for Black folks and folks who've been left out of dominant narratives, for us to trust that our imagination can help us fill holes and to bring life and flesh out the sort of emptinesses that are left by the lack of record. So I was excited to hear about to think about where we go beyond Twitter. How are we sharing information with each other, telling our own stories? How are we recording our own history? How are we creating our own archives and legacies?
Rob, what are your thoughts when you just Erin's comments and her work as you are being introduced to it now? Any questions or thoughts or comments?
Well, I'm hugely interested. I want to go look for your films, and I think something you're saying now, and it relates to your work with abolition, is right this idea of imagination, and I think that is part of what is so powerful about social media and folks who are using social media to engage in helping people imagine a world that is radically different than what we have now. And that's right. That we can think about that as being a transformative type of organizing that is building the capacity of people to think about the world differently, to question dominant explanations for why structures are what they are. And so things like prisons, right? Abolition work begins with imagination work. What would a society look like where we don't need prisons? And that's tough, right? If you think about abolitionists have been far left for a very long time. There's a long intellectual history of Black activists doing abolitionist work, but it has always been seen as being radical. And recently, it has become more mainstream. And this is something I talk about in the book about, right? During the uprisings in 2020, something like 80% of tweets that were talking about prison reform mentioned the word abolition. It's baffling for folks who have been doing the work and being pushed aside in mainstream prison reform spaces. And so I think that we're seeing this imagination work take place where people are able to think about new strategies, things like defund the police. This is coming out of the abolitionist movement, even though it's kind of been taken and made a little bit less radical and more reformist, but it came out of a radical call to if they can't get this together, then we need to end this institution altogether. And so I am hugely interested in your work. I'm inspired by the things that you're doing, and especially the way that you're using art and using storytelling. This is kind of my post book work has been moving towards using storytelling for social justice and anti-oppressive work. And so thank you so much for what you're doing. I hope to follow what you do next and learn a little bit more about these projects too.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
Well, our producer, Yasmin, put a note up. She says, in a prison-free society, would communities play a more active role in resolving conflicts and addressing harm within their own neighborhoods. And she says, how can a greater sense of community and connection help reduce the need for prisons? She also says, what underlying factors or societal issues contribute to the need of prisons in the first place? How can we address poverty, inequality, and other systemic issues to prevent crime before it happens? And as you think about that, let me just say one thing, sort of, this is a mutation or another twist or a pivot on the same general question about safety and the role of prisons, the courts, the criminal justice system. Erin, you know that maybe a couple of months ago, our Attorney General stepped in and got the governor to request his control of a case involving a couple of young men that killed some people. And the long story, Rob, long story short, is that, and I can't remember the details of it now, but some lives lost, and younger than 18, technically juveniles involved in this murder. Can't remember. And the county prosecutor, who's a progressive, wanted to figure out how to approach the resolution for one of the juveniles differently, from lock them up. But the Attorney General stepped in and said, oh no, this crime is so heinous that and the families are so hurt that justice and healing for them is some sort of retribution specifically. So what do you do with that, Erin? I think you got to kind of understand. And the point, Rob, is that the Attorney General is a Black man here, Keith Ellison, right? Who has always been a leading progressive, both locally and nationally. But Keith now
Hi there. So it looks like Miss Al has frozen. So we're going to continue with that conversation. So Erin, if you care to kind of answer that question, that would be great. And I will try to work to get him on.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, I think that abolition does not mean lack of a justice system, lack of punishment. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we maybe approach it differently, and that we think about the effectiveness of our institutions. Policing they don't solve that many crimes. They aren't preventing crimes often. And so I think thinking about that, abolition doesn't mean going back to zero. It's not like we open the doors to prisons without any infrastructure built. I think about the ways, and I thank you for your question, Yasmin, about the ways that I don't think crime comes out of nowhere. I'm not a person who thinks people are born with some criminality inherent to them. Maybe I'm a Pollyanna or something. But that's my worldview. I don't think people pop out with some evilness. And so I think that folks make hard decisions. Folks are left in hard intersections and make bad choices. And so I think about the ways in which we have all these legacies of racist systems, of redlining, of enslavement, all those things that didn't just go away because we changed a law. There are ramifications that still ripple through our communities. And so I think addressing those things with investment, with resource abundance, feels like a way of creating safety nets along the way, of helping families before they get into really hard spots, thinking about the ways that we don't continue to do things that aren't working.
And if I could add to that,
Sure. Thank you.
No, a shockingly high percentage of folks who are incarcerated have mental health issues, have drug misuse issues, and these are things that we have solutions for. If more people had access to mental health care, right, things, right, like how can we help people before it gets to the point of a crime being committed? If we had more economic opportunity, then folks aren't going to be looking towards the drug economy to make a living. Right. Like I think when I have some of these personal discussions with friends who don't like the idea of abolition, who believe that people who are incarcerated deserve to be there. I once sent a video, or no, I think a friend sent me a video of a gang member talking about why he did not have a real job. And in the video, the gang member said, like the interviewer asked, what would you need in order to get off the streets? And he said, I would need a lot, man. I would probably need $20 an hour in order to stop selling drugs. And so I sent the video back. I was like, this is kind of making my point, because this brother is saying all he needs is a living wage to decide to not be selling drugs anymore. And that just proves the point of folks are not taking this path because it is so attractive to them. It is out of desperation. And so I think that is part of what abolitionists do, is is not just thinking about prison reform, it is thinking about society reform. And how can we build a more just society that where we don't need prisons, because we are taking care of people instead of leaving them to rot and then being surprised when folks and this is ignoring, that we haven't even gotten into the way that Black and brown communities are over policed, or the the ways that we're white folks are committing the same crimes but not doing the same time. And so we're just talking about how do we fix justice issues more broadly, but then we also have blatant racism in the system that puts us behind bars for things that people are doing and getting away with if their skin is a different hue.
Exactly. So my question is then, whose responsibility is to change this narrative, right? Like, we obviously know what the issue is. We also obviously know that, inequality places, but whose responsibility is it to change this narrative so that we can create a new direction?
I mean, I think it's a shared responsibility. And I think that that's, part of its challenge is that it's not just one person that's going to change everyone's minds. But I think that the heart of it is around connection. It's around being more connected to each other.
Great.
I don't think. What do you think, Rob?
No, I don't know that I'm going to place the responsibility on someone, but I love to see our people get involved in this conversation, and I don't know that we need one leader. I love that, right? One of the things about social media being a democratizing place is that we're able to have ordinary people get involved in this conversation. And this is a lesson that we learned from Ella Baker, that the movement is not about the Dr. King. It's about training up regular ordinary people to have the capacity to fight for themselves and for their communities. And so I think the responsibility is on all of us to build and raise leaders from our communities who are able to push this conversation.
Well, great. Miss Al is back, so I'm going to let him take it away.
No, that's fine. This was a wonderful conversation. And so, Rob, if we do that, as we do that, how will it look? What would be different? In your mind's eye, describe the community. I guess one might have called it the beloved community. Describe that. And how will we use, in your mind, the technology to get us there?
So in my mind, the role of the technology is to do the imagination work. And it is about expanding the way that people think about these issues. And so what that means for me is more and more people questioning the dominant narrative, which is that people who are in prison deserve to be in prison because they did something bad. And the more that I think the job of activists online is to prove to people that is not the case. And then once we prove that is not the case, then what we're seeing are interventions that are being tried that that don't rely on kind of carceral methods. And so sending social workers out instead of police officers to respond to mental health crises. And can we prove that this is a better way to deal with folks who are having issues that don't mean they need to be locked up? It means they need access to more social services. And so I think that what we're doing, what we're seeing is this conversation on bringing attention to issues. And then we're seeing programs and policies being piloted to prove our point, and that is what I hope to see on a broader scale. Once some of these smaller experiments work, whether it's from defunding the police and putting money towards more just methods, or whether it's these experiments with reparations and convincing folks that there is a link between a legacy of oppression and current issues in the community.
Listen, this has been a wonderful conversation. Erin Sharkey, Rob Eschmann, thank you so very, very much. Take one more second to announce your book and to invite people to buy. Rob, you first.
Yeah, my book is called When the Hood Comes Off, Racism and Resistance in the Digital Age. You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you want to support your local bookstore and they don't have it in stock, you can go ahead and ask them to order it. So anywhere books are sold, you can get it.
Awesome. And Erin?
Awesome. A Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars is a Milkweed publication. You can get it at Milkweed's bookstore or any place you get books, or online if you'd like to.
Thank you both so very much, and continued good work for you. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.